everybody. I'm really excited to be here today to help, do my part, not just as an Indigenous person, but as a person in this country, to share what I can, the knowledge that I have, to help people understand the things that are happening across the country in terms of Indigenous Lives Matters, as we had our conference yesterday, our Congress yesterday, on that subject. But yeah, today I'm going to share as what I can on introduction to indigenization. I'm just going to pull up my screen here. Great, thank you so much. So, yeah, like Alex had introduced this morning, the unity and diversity is the focus with the Canadian Congress on an inclusive diversity and workplace equity. And like I said, I'm going to talk about introduction to indigenization today. And just a bit about myself, like Jennifer had given me a great introduction, so thank you. I just wanted to say I am Haudenosaunee. As was mentioned in the land acknowledgement. So I'm Haudenosaunee member at Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And yeah, most recently, my research is one of the things that has really guided me into doing different type of work. But yeah, still Indigenous content, still, looking to create equity and diversity and inclusion in all fabrics of Canada. Okay, so yeah, so today, like I said, I'm Haudenosaunee from Six Nations of Grand River Territory, and in our practices as Haudenosaunee people, we always like to open a circle or an event or a teaching time, whatever we want to call this, with a traditional Haudenosaunee opening. And so I'm going to share my prayer in my languages, and then I will reiterate in English and give a little more explanation. So, Nyawa goa sangwaindiso sangwawi ganyohanyo, ne deatinu warado, ne ongoi soa, etu no yuduhage, ne ngwatni gura. So in my languages, in Cayuga language, Haudenosaunee people, we have 6 distinct languages within our confederacy. So one of those languages is the Cayuga language. And I started off saying, thank you very much to our higher power for giving us things to be thankful for. So the second part of my prayer I talked about was in Mohawk, in the Mohawk language. And I just wanted to acknowledge all people that are here today joining us, and all the people, impacting all of our lives all the time in great ways, all the love and support that we receive from people, but also, the people that challenge our lives sometimes, right? We're to acknowledge those people too, because when we are presented challenges in our lives, it gives us an opportunity to reflect and to grow and to process and to understand what's happening. So I just wanted to acknowledge all the people. And lastly, in my prayer, I said, now our minds are one. So in a very much longer prayer that our men share at ceremonies, at meetings, at celebrations, our speaker will acknowledge everything in creation and talk about all the wonderful things that creation provides for our well-being, as well as contributes to the ecosystem, our natural environment. So in that prayer, the speaker will always acknowledge at the end, now our minds are one. And when he says that part, that is the objective of our prayer, is that we want everybody to come together in the most divine place in your mind. And that place is from gratitude and appreciation, right? So when we say, we're thankful for the trees because they do this, this, and this for us, and they provide this and that for our well-being, and they contribute to the entire ecosystem in whatever ways, then the speaker says, now our minds are one. And that's our indicator to say, yes, we agree with you. We're so thankful for that. And as he goes through this speech that he'll deliver on behalf of all of us, he will keep saying that after every time he acknowledges something in creation. And he'll say, now our minds are one. And that's our cue to say, yes, we can put everything else aside at this point. all our worries, all our responsibilities, or, concerns of what else we have to do. And we can be in the moment and we can say, yes, we are so thankful for that, and I've been taught that we are the most pitiful of all of creation, of the four families of the world. We have the animal kingdom, we have the plant life, we have the mineral life, and then we have the human race. And I was taught that we are the most pitiful is because we cannot survive without the other three families. However, they could survive without us. So I just wanted to share that opening to get started. Now I hope everybody is feeling really thankful and grateful, just imagining all the things in creation that is constantly working for our well-being. And all we have to do is say thank you, right? So I'm going to go on and tell you about our agenda today. We're going to talk about the revealing of unmarked graves of the Indigenous children. I got some videos and things to share with you on that. And then we're going to go into talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And then we're going to talk about ways forward. And after all of that, I want to talk about our reflection investment. And that is comes from what I've been taught my whole life is to approach everything from a holistic manner, to not just learn, but to reflect on what we've learned and decide, like, how is this going to impact my life? How is it impacting me now? Where am I going to go with this information? Where am I going to go with these feelings and the way that, this information moves my spirit, right? So, and then we'll do a conclusion and closing words. So let's get into the past, present, and future, the 7 generations as people talk about. So historically, Indigenous people maintained a relationship with the land and all of creation. That is prior to colonization, right? Currently, with colonization, with all this coming together, Mother Earth is ill from development, progress, and civilization. We have climate change and global melting, global warming, they call. So Indigenous people might say that Mother Earth is cleansing herself. Like we've done enough damage. She's cleansing herself, right? And then going on to the last part of our future, it's all of our responsibility for all of our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, to ensure that they have um, a thriving environment, natural environment to grow from and to thrive from. So in that 7 generations teaching, I'm just going to share briefly is that what I was taught about the 7 generations is not about the next 7 generations. However, it's about the 7 generations that I can comprehend in my existence, right? So when I was young, I asked my aunt about the 7 generations. I can't even think that far ahead, Auntie. And she said, well, that's because you're excluding the previous generation. So actually, the 7 generations, she says, you're in the middle. You're that middle generation, and you are where you are, and things are where they're at in your time in this life because of the 3 generations before you. So, because of my parents, my grandparents, and my great grandparents, I am where I am today, and I am who I am today. And my responsibility is the next 3 generations. So my children, my grandchildren, and my great grandchildren. And when she explained this to me, she said, that's the 7 generations that we talk about. We have to include all of them, all 7 generations are you and your prior 3 and the 3 that you are responsible to. So that made sense to me. I could live with that. I can understand that. I can now understand like 7 generations. Before 7 generations ahead, I can't even think that far ahead. So, anyways, I just wanted to explain that concept of the 7 generations. So, how did we get here? So, when I say how did we get here, how did we get to this point as of, just this morning, the news come out about another grave, unmarked grave with 751 people that were, revealed in this grave on a former Indian residential school. So that's what I'm referring to. How did we get here? right? So historical foundation of colonization of Turtle Island, we call North America Turtle Island, and that can be a story for another time. But throughout the history of Canada, throughout the history and the colonization of North America, these are the things that had happened, and I'm going to go into a little more detail. But we have the Doctrine of Discovery, we have the British North American Act, we have the Indian Act, we have the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People, and then now we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So we're going to explore those a little bit. So I'm going to invite everybody to just sit back. We're going to watch some videos. This is a video taken from a college course on treaties and Aboriginal title in Canada, and it just gives us some background to the Doctrine of Discovery. So
I think we always wondered why did they think it was right or just to do what they did was, to take our lands and to push us off our lands and try to eliminate us as a people. And then we discovered this doctrine of discovery, and it just kind of made things understandable as to where they got their direction from.
When Columbus landed, and he went back and he reported, and they said then, the leaders, and the Vatican was the most powerful voice in the world at that time. A papal bull, 1493, 1 year later. If there are no Christian nations in this new land you have discovered, I declare those lands to be empty. Terra nullius, very old Roman law that had been exercised in Africa, India, Europe. Further, if there are people there and they are not Christians, they do not have a right of title to land. They have only the right of occupancy. From our perspective, the same right as a rabbit running on the ground, or a turkey, or a deer, or a buffalo, or an Indian. They do not have a right of title to land. 1823, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall adjudicating the case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Two white men arguing over Ohio Indian land. He says, you boys have it all wrong. Don't you understand? This was settled long ago. They don't have a right of title to land. And he moved that principle into U.S. federal law, 1823. The doctrine of discovery became the doctrine of law today. Christian doctrine, specific. Wasn't Muslim doctrine, wasn't Jewish doctrine, Christian. And it prevails. It's here, it's a reality, but most people don't understand that, and most people don't know that. We didn't even understand that on 1990, 1991, when I first really said, wow, what's the doctrine of discovery? What is that? A young man by name was Steve Newcomb said, I got something, you guys gotta see it. Came out of Peru. Came out of people down there that were really digging. It was an unspoken conspiracy by states going on all those years. Shh, don't tell the Indians. We found out anyway. eventually, finally. 2007, Oneida versus New York, court case. First notation by a Supreme Court Justice, Doctrine of Discovery. 2007. It's not alive. I think it's alive and well. 30-year court case for undocumentation, dismissed out of hand. Oh, you guys were too slow, it's too late. Let's make up, new latches, we'll call it. Besides, it's disruptive to our people. That's what the justice said. It's disruptive. No discussion about our people and about justice and about what's right. The American people don't know about this. Well, it's time they learn. It's time they learn because it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us. And I would be very, very, very careful about stamping out the last place that's holding the line the hardest. Haudenosaunee Six Nation. That's holding the line the hardest. For the common good. For the good of all. For the future. That's what I have to say.
Early European explorers and settlers, and their respective colonial powers, erroneously considered the so-called New World to be nobody's land. There was a prevailing belief at the time that by discovering and settling lands in the New World, a nation then possessed title to those lands. When Indigenous people today assert Aboriginal title, it is a challenge to underlying Crown title. For almost 200 years, Canadian courts considered the source of Aboriginal title to be the Royal Proclamation, which meant that while Aboriginal title existed, it could be extinguished at the whim of the Crown. That changed with a Supreme Court ruling in 1973, when prior occupation was considered to be the source of Aboriginal title. The burden of proving prior occupation, however, lies with the Indigenous nation asserting Aboriginal title.
In the beginning, we talked about the agenda and talked about, how did we get here? We're talking about these unmarked graves that are being revealed across the country today. We talked about, I showed briefly about the doctrine of discovery, and I'm just going to be honest for a minute, if that's okay. This is very, very challenging work, as we can imagine, right? I mean, as human beings, we're, looking at the true history of this country that has been, home to many, many people from different backgrounds. And now, I've taught with many, many people at institutions, organizations, to talk about this truth of this country. And I've taken them on tours to, formal residential school in Brantford, Ontario. It's now called the Woodland Culture Center. It was the Mohawk Institution for Indian children, we were called, right? And I'm going to talk a bit about that when we talk about the Indian Act. But, taking people through that tour and helping people see what had happened in this country, the most recent horrific atrocity in this country was the Indian residential schools. And that's how we got to, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So just for a moment, I want to explain what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is for anybody that doesn't know. So a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is an international practice. So Canada is the 40th country that has actually acknowledged a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to say that they have done something really horrible. So typically what would happen is a 5-year research project would happen to see what are the impacts and effects on what the country has acknowledged as a really horrible thing that they've done in history. So Canada acknowledged the Indian residential school, and there was a lot of things that happened prior to this acknowledgement, from Indigenous leadership, pushing this commission. And so Canada, like I said, it's typically a 5-year research project. But because of, records being destroyed, because of the, commissioner who was Murray Sinclair, then became senator and now is retired. But he was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and he recognized very early on in the study that 5 years was not going to be enough because there was so much documentation missing. So what he had done is he applied to the Supreme Court of Canada and asked for a year extension to do the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Indian residential schools. So he was granted that. It was a 6-year research study. With that year that he was granted the extension, he did interviews with residential school survivors and sometimes their descendants. And he brought an element to research that is different, that has been very different, and that's the emotional impacts, on what a country has acknowledged as something really horrible that they have done. So for Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the report was launched in June of 2015. And at that launching of that report, it's a 6-volume report that's been put out. And Justin Trudeau was there. I was there for this launch of this report. And Justin Trudeau's response was that, he didn't know. A lot of Canadians didn't know. He was very tearful. He was very human to say this is horrible and we have to do better. We have to do better for future generations. So if we want to go ahead and share the slideshow, I'm not going to go through and share all the videos and things that I prepared to share today because it just is not in the cards to happen that way. So we're going to adapt and we're going to do what we can to help bring this introduction to this City of Brampton employees that have joined us today. So if we can go ahead, Alex, up to the Indian Act. This Indian Act, so this is the one thing that I wanted everyone to surely see and try to understand. This is a diagram, 21 things that you may not know about the Indian Act. So I'm just going to explain the term Indian for a minute. So Indigenous people, as we know today, have, gone through a very different terminology that, colonial institutions and legislation has given us. So for me, we started out and said, I am Haudenosaunee. That is who I am. That's the nation, the confederacy that I come from that comprises of 6 nations, right? So throughout history in colonial legislation, we've been referred to as starting as Indians, So in this country, when you hear the Indian Act, it is not referring to people that descend from India. It is the Indigenous people of this country called Canada now. So legislation has changed. We've been called Aboriginal. We've been now, more recently, we're called Indigenous. But however, that legislation, that terminology has never changed. So I just wanted to share that. So with this 21 things that we need to know about the Indian Act, is some very racist things, as you can see through here. You know, women were denied status, you know, all these different things. The introduction of residential school came from the Indian Act. Canada was formed in 1867. The Constitution of Canada was formed in 1867. The Indian Act was formed and implemented in 1876, 9 years after Canada was became a country. So the agenda continued throughout, you know, creating reserves, putting us on reserves, renamed Indigenous people. My traditional Haudenosaunee name, or my original name as an individual, is Heo Tandok, but my English name is Kelly Fran Davis. So that talks to that. That speaks to that a little more. And then going into things, oh, somebody has this book. Thank you, Catherine. It's very informative, like she said, but it goes into more detail about these things that have been used to eliminate Indigenous people in Canada, and for what? For the land, for the resources, right? For the corporation of Canada, you know, all business, no humanity, you know. So anyways, I won't go into that too much. But it was against the law up until, you know, the 1950s, before Indigenous people could hire a lawyer in this country. So all through, you know, all through the most part of these Indian residential schools, and the children being stolen out of the homes of Indigenous people and taken to residential schools. No Indigenous people, parents, they could not hire a lawyer to try to get their children back. If they went to these residential schools to try to take their children back, they were criminalized, they were arrested, and they were thrown in jail. You know, these are some of the things that the Indian Act has done to Indigenous people, right? And this Indian Act was developed from Sir John A. Macdonald. You know, if you've noticed across the country, there's, you know, groups, I'm not even going to say Indigenous people, because there's a lot of non-Indigenous people as well supporting taking down these statues of Sir John A. Macdonald. And this is why. This is why, because Sir John A. Macdonald had a term that he used, and I won't quote unquote, but basically the genocide was kill the Indian, save the child. So that was his words that he used in this genocide attempt of Indigenous people in Canada. So it's a really good resource, like Catherine said. This book, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph. Very great book, and it can help you understand this a little bit more. I'm being mindful of the time, and I think I'd like to move on to the next slide now. So the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People, this document was over 4,000 pages. It was a research project as well to look at, you know, to investigate and propose solutions to the challenges affecting the relationship between Aboriginal people, as we were called at that time, and the Canadian government and Canadian society as a whole. So this report had a budget of $60 million. It came out, there was a total of 5 commissioners in getting this report together. They visited 96 First Nations community. They were holding 178 days of public hearings. And this was, it came out with, I don't know how many recommendations, oodles of recommendations on what could be done to, you know, to change and affect the relationship of Indigenous people now with the Canadian government and Canada as a whole. One of the biggest recommendations that came out of this, what we call the RCAP, the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People, it was actually the recommendation to do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the Indian residential schools of Canada. So going forward onto the next slide is about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So when I talk about how did we get here to, if you could advance to the next slide, Alex. How did we get here to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to the unveiling, the revealing, I'm going to say, of the unmarked graves of Indigenous children on former Indian residential school sites. And I want to say why I say the revealing and not the discovery. It's not a discovery, it's a revealing. Because, I know for myself as an Indigenous person, I've known most of my life that those graves were out there. I heard stories, from people that care very deeply for me. And so this was a contradiction I lived with throughout my life, is thinking this cannot be possible. How can people kill children and bury them and not be accountable or not be, how can that happen? I couldn't conceive that in my mind, right? But at the same time, the conflict for me was people that are telling me these stories are people that care about me. These are the people that love me and support me and teach me all kinds of great things in my life. So it was a real contradiction in my mind throughout my life. So when that first revealing of the grave in British Columbia in Kamloops of the 215 children, it confirmed everything for me. It was confirmation for me, and I'm one Indigenous person in this country, but this is a very hard time. But again, at the same time, it's a rejoiceful time, I guess, because now those children will be able to be put to rest properly, and now people are starting to see, like one of the chiefs out west had said this morning in an interview. He says the world is seeing the unearthing of the genocide in Canada. And that's with these graves being revealed. So now, and not to attempt to try to hurt or harm or pass the shame and guilt and all of that onto anybody else, onto Canadian citizens or anybody else. But it's a time to, say, okay, this is the truth. This is the truth part of that commission. How do we start to move forward in reconciliation? How do we start to ensure that our future generations, have a better and brighter future together, right? As humanity, as one people, as a race, as a human race, right? That other fourth pitiful family of creation, right? So yeah, so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it went through a lot of struggles. I know former Senator Murray Sinclair, who is the chair of this commission. I've talked to him a number of times. My daughter was an ambassador for him at a healing conference. And, he's so kind and gentle, and just to think of what he had gone through doing these interviews, listening to his own people, of all the horrific things that happened to them as children just because they are Indigenous. Just because they're Indigenous, you know? And for what? For the Corporation of Canada, the lands, the resources, the business, you know? So I don't want to get into that too much because I could go on a long time, and I want to definitely leave time for question and comment. So if we can go on to the next slide, Alex. I just want to talk about ways forward. There's the calls to action, which is if you go on the National Center of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission website, you can find all of the reports there. But the one report is the calls to action, the 94 calls to action. And in that report, in that calls to action is the recommendations or the suggestions, and it's broken down into categories. So whatever sector you work in, there's a category: education, social justice, the justice system, child welfare, even museums and things like that. Also, there is calls to action there that talk about these murdered and missing children. Calls 71 to 76 talk about these unmarked graves, about all of these children that were missing or murdered from these Indian residential schools. So anyways, the calls to action, you can go in there and you can see what's happening. There's also, and I didn't share it on here and I'm sorry about that, but there is also, thank you for sharing that, Jennifer. There is also another website that you may be able to utilize and see what other people are doing and how they're doing it. Is CBC Indigenous has a page called Beyond 94. So if you go on that page, you can see what other people have been doing, what's going on, and there's a lot of great resources there. I don't try to prescribe or tell people what they have to do or what they should do. But I mean, I know this unveiling or revealing of these unmarked graves of children across this country that is happening now, that's going to be happening for a very long time. I hate to say, but there's a lot of residential schools in this country, and there's going to be a lot of communities, Indigenous communities, that are going to, find and reveal these graves, and because it's a responsibility that we have to our ancestors. Anyhow, so just because of what's happening in this country, I mean, we're talking about equity, we're talking about inclusion, and that all comes and has to be infused with humanity, right? So I know I have colleagues that have called me from Wilfrid Laurier, from other places that I work and do work with, have called me and said, I'm so sorry. This is bothering me so much. And I said, well, I'm sorry it's bothering you. And they said, what? I called to apologize to you and your people. And I said, well, this is a humanity issue. This is not an Indigenous issue. This is a humanity issue. So I know everybody here on this call, everybody across this country has capacity to, indigenize, to talk about Indigenous things, to understand Indigenous lives matter, right? And so whatever our capacity, sometimes, I teach at the Wilfrid Laurier University, second-year teacher candidates, and my students, I always encourage them, if nothing else, within your capacity as a teacher, if you can indigenize your pedagogy and, bring your students into a circle, never mind this form of authoritative environment that teachers create, right? The authority at the front and the children are lined up in rows or whatever. If you can bring in a circle into your classroom and indigenize your practice, that's doing something really great, and that will impact generations of children, of learners to come. So I wanted to, leave you with that and just say that, there's opportunities in every fabric of every organization in this country to indigenize, and whatever that looks like, if it's bringing in Indigenous ways, if it's helping to bring in Indigenous professionals, if it's helping to highlight, the great Indigenous people in your community, right, whatever that looks like. But yeah, my email address is there. And Kelly at the Canadian Congress on diversity.ca. I can be reached there. Also, okay, you could go ahead, Alex. So this one is about the reflection investment, and I will encourage everybody to share your reflections in the chat. Share how this information is impacting you as a person. How does it impact you in your profession? What does it bring for you? What does it, how does it change you? What will make you grow from this, and maybe not just share here in the chat, but take some time later and have a conversation with your loved ones or your colleagues or your friends or your parents or somebody and say, hey, you know what, this is what I learned about today. And this is what, just reflecting on, this is how I'm feeling about it, because that's the most important thing. And Alex, if you go to the next slide, it's a great quote by John Dewey. He says, we do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on our experience. And I want to, just say that bringing this information to people is not easy. It's not easy as an Indigenous person. It's definitely not easy for non-Indigenous people. But I feel a sense of responsibility to my ancestors, the 3 generations prior to me, to maintain an Indigenous way of doing things, to maintain my values as a Haudenosaunee person, as a Haudenosaunee woman, to always be kind and to be loving and to invite people into this work to say we can do this and we can do this together, right? And let's have Indigenous people lead this work, right? From a good place, from that beautiful love and that, that excitement and that, responsibility that we can do this and we have to do this. It's our responsibility because our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren are dependent on us. They're dependent on us to make sure that the history is not repeated in this country. And so with that, I just want to say, I'm sorry about the slideshow, but I truly believe, everything happens for a reason. Everything goes the way it's supposed to go. And the presentation I prepared included a lot of videos and whatnot, but I feel so much more honored to be able to share from my heart the things that, it is the most important for us right now in this time that we're facing with the things that we're seeing across the country. So with that, I want to say a closing so I can close to that right at this moment, and then we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. So I'm just going to say my prayer to say thank you, our higher power, for giving us things to be thankful for, because I am truly thankful to be here with the city of Brampton today. And I look forward to, the ongoing work that we're going to do with Congress having this 6-month contract with the city of Brampton. And it's been a pleasure being with all of you today. And I look forward to the work that we'll continue to do. So, Nyawagoa, Sangwaindiso, Sangwawi, Ganyohanyo. Thank you.